Hey, all you ghosts and goblins. Welcome back to another episode of your favorite podcast, That Would Be Rad. We're a podcast that majors in 80s and 90s nostalgia, comic culture, all things paranormal, and minors in retro video games, tabletop RPGs like our favorite Dungeons and Dragons, pre-internet mysteries, and raising our kids to be half as cool as we were back in the 80s. We are your terrifying hosts, Woody Brown
and Tyler Benz. Hey,
kind of a delay there, man. Did you take your headphones off, or what happened?
I did not. I think there's some latency issues.
Really? Seriously?
With my mind.
Oh,
because my child is continually listen, folks. If you guys have any tips out there for sort of curbing your 4-year-old waking up in the middle of the night at like 2 and 3 in the morning every night and coming in and just it's not like she's scared. No like sleep, like nightmares or what is it called? What are they called?
Night terrors.
Night terrors. That's it.
Okay.
Nothing like that. When she comes in, she's very pleasant, but just like ready to rock and roll.
And
I'm just like, oh god. And it sucks because like the whole day is sort of ruined because I'm just exhausted.
Kind of sounds like the circadian rhythm's a little off there.
Yeah, but I don't know how. I don't know what.
I know you had kind of something in mind for today's show, but this time it's my turn to pivot.
Don't do it to me.
Well, we've both been doing a lot of traveling, and I've had the opportunity to read more here and there in transit. And man, I found this local story. Again, we're going to come at our listeners with a Georgia-grown, tantalizing tale.
I like
that. I think you're going to like, man. So I can't believe we haven't talked about this kind of before, but now seems like the perfect time. So if you're down, I'm just gonna give it to you, man.
I'm ready.
That's not...
Give it to me, champ.
All right. So first off, listeners and Tyler, you'll definitely agree to this, but, here in Georgia, we have a ton of interesting locations that are potential hotspots for hauntings. We've kind of talked about them a little bit before on our show, but just like off the top of our heads here, I'm thinking about, old historic cemeteries. And it's not too uncommon for us to be driving around, especially up where, you grew up, and there's just like a family cemetery in somebody's backyard that's been there for hundreds of years.
Oh, yeah.
There's also...
I mean, even I'm not derailing, but even like the small, tiny little Blue Creek Baptist Church that I grew up in, we had like the regular cemetery, and then like across the road was like, it's like you literally drive in grass. There's not even a road.
Yeah.
And it's just like the weirdest. And there's this one thing that's like this big slab of stone, and it's got these weird like spirals carved into the top. No names. That's just weird like symbols. And like I was always told that it's Native American graveyards, but yeah, we have those things all over the place.
Yeah, I mean, like even whenever I first moved to Georgia, I mean, dead honest, it's not again uncommon for you to just kind of be playing out in the woods and stumble upon these old, like you said, unmarked graves. Maybe the materials that they used weren't the highest of quality, and so if there was a name etched into it, it's since been sort of because of weather and the elements and stuff, it's no longer marked.
Lost to time.
Yeah, exactly. And so there's that. And then also we're surrounded by a bunch of old Civil War battlegrounds where like obviously hundreds or thousands of soldiers, died. And it could literally be your backyard, right? I mean, just all kinds of locations like that we're just surrounded by. But there is a city here in Georgia that it doesn't matter if you're from here, if you're not from here. Potentially, I guess if you're listening to this on the other side of the world, you may not know this, but there's a city here in Georgia that is pretty well known for having a lot or a higher concentration of haunted locations here in the South. And that is the beautiful city of Savannah, Georgia.
Oh, yeah, of course. My immediate thing that comes to mind is also one of the shadiest and scariest places to be out late at night. that we played like when we were touring.
Yeah. And see, I don't remember really kind of walking around late at night in Savannah.
No, we didn't. We literally like stayed like within the block of like the venue and then like behind the venue, but it was just super sketch and like people just like walking by and like looking, like seeing what was going on. Like any minute I felt like we were going to be held up at gunpoint.
Mm-hmm. It's an interesting kind of area. What's also interesting about Georgia in general, and I'm going to get a little bit historical here with you guys, is that if you're familiar with Georgia history, one thing that is not unique to our state, but sort of unfortunate, is that during the Civil War, one of the things that happened was a lot of the historic buildings and stuff were kind of destroyed and or burnt down by General Sherman. Yeah. And I say unfortunate because, you can go to other parts of the country and there's really, really cool old architecture and stuff, especially up north and out west and stuff. But here in Georgia, some of those buildings still exist, but a lot of them are, not that old. They're especially didn't last a lot of the colonial times. What's interesting about Savannah is it's one of those cities that kind of still has a lot of those historic buildings and stuff. In fact, another fun fact for those of you that don't live in the Peach State like Tyler and I do, is that Savannah was actually the very first state capital of Georgia.
Really?
Mm-hmm.
I'm kind of a history buff, and I had no idea.
Yeah, man. Wow. I'm going to lay down a little knowledge for you history buffs. So way back in February of 1733, James Oglethorpe and the first Georgia colonists landed at Yamacraw Bluff. And that's where they kind of laid out this new settlement, which we now know of as Savannah. They made a treaty with a chief Tomachichi, and they kind of basically gave them some creek land from Savannah to the Altamaha rivers and inland. And we'll talk about that river at some point in the near future for sure. So a couple decades later, Revolutionary War happens. Ever heard of it? And basically Savannah was this, it's an interesting city because it's coastal, right? And so it is a very important port city, especially then, but even to this day. And
so you're saying it's probably much like the grasslands of like South Carolina.
Oh yeah, it is very low country vibes.
Yeah,
right?
low country.
Spanish moss growing on the trees. It is an absolutely gorgeous area.
It actually looks a lot like New Orleans.
It does remind me a little bit of New Orleans for sure. It's got that vibe, that old sort of colonial vibe.
Yeah.
And same with Charleston,
just like
South Carolina.
Yeah, like the terrain, like all the Spanish moss, like you were saying.
Anyway, during the Revolutionary War, and by the way, guys, I know it's almost Halloween, and I'm dropping a lot of history on you. But I just think it's interesting. If you're not from Georgia, or, look at Tyler. He's lived here literally his whole life, didn't know Savannah was the first capital. Oh, didn't pay attention in school. Okay.
I had no idea.
It's fine. It's fine.
What's funny is I actually, in high school, I won the history award for the entire school.
Well,
had no idea.
Okay, look, we already talked about all the awards at your school. There's 10 other students, so it's not really.
It's not.
They didn't even teach. I mean, that should tell you everything you need to know, folks. About
we were literally
of this
a grade
award.
ahead of public school.
We award this fellow with the history award. Didn't teach him what the first capital was. Whoops. Okay, doesn't matter. The Revolutionary War starts. Savannah basically they moved the capital from Savannah to Augusta, and then how Atlanta became the capital of Georgia. We're not going to get into it here. Okay, pal?
Okay. I mean,
Look,
I do know
don't
that...
want to do your teacher's job from your
I do know that was a fairly common thing for states to have, moved capitals. But, I never knew that about Georgia.
Yeah.
Huh. What was the reason that they set up the capital in Savannah to begin with? Just because it was first...
one of the first places that they saw, and it was just a good port because, when they in 1733, they were still part of... It was one of the original colonies, so they're still part of England or Great Britain. But anyway, Savannah fell to the British forces, and so Georgia moved and reorganized in Augusta. But here's the thing. I say all that to just kind of give you some context about how old the city is in our state, and that there are still these old, buildings and the vibe. There's a really nice historical section. And by the way, if you like to run and you're into like marathons or half marathons, one of the best races I've ever done is the Savannah rock and roll half marathon. Because every mile on the course, there's like bands playing. I mean, every and any kind of music. All the people of Savannah come out. You run right by this like historical section, and folks come out on their front porches and they're just like supporting you that morning. It's really, really cool.
Or if you like to run from things, just going down to where the Bluebird is and that area real late at night.
Yeah,
and I promise you'll get a good run.
Is that the venue that we played, Bluebird?
Yeah.
I remember.
The only reason I remember that is because the sound guy told me. I've never forgot this. It really stuck with me. He told me, because as you know, Woody, I was very, very specific about. God, we can't have an episode without it. No, I was very particular with this very specific niche guitar tone. Yeah. And I would spend hours, and it was never right, and I was always dialing in stuff. And I remember that sound guy was like, "That's the best guitar tone I've ever heard in my entire life," and it always stuck with me. So
yeah, I love it, man. Whenever you meet a cool sound guy.
Oh yeah.
All right, we're not talking about history and Tyler's guitar tone. We're here to talk about the scary stuff. And here's the thing, man. Like I said, Savannah is haunted. It's not even an abrasive thing to kind of say here. It's kind of saying Chicago has a lot of wind. Texas is flat. I mean, literally.
California sucks.
Literally every single, not every street, but it's just a high, there's these incredible sort of ghost tours and stuff that you can do.
Oh, yeah.
In Savannah. But today I want to talk about this place called the Hampton Lillibridge House.
I've never heard of this.
I hadn't either, man. And apparently this is one of the most, it's been listed as one of the most haunted houses in the entire United States of America.
Wow.
So you look at it, and from the outside, it looks like a pretty normal, quiet, private residence.
Mm-hmm.
And here's what's kind of neat. The local experts in the city rate it as one of the most haunted locations in Savannah. So not only it's just across the board, this place is intense, and it's the only location in Savannah where they actually performed a religious exorcism, which, by the way, failed.
Wow.
Again, it's called the Hampton Lillibridge House. It's located deep in the historical district, a short walk from Oglethorpe Square. For such a seemingly normal house, it has been through a lot of suffering and death. And so I'm going to kind of take you through some of its history here. But we're going to start with the very first death that happened.
After these messages, we'll be right back.
This is Amy Poehler. My new movie, Disney and Pixar's Inside Out 2, is coming to theaters June 14th, and it's making me feel joy and sadness and anger, definitely some disgust, and I think a little fear. But I'm also feeling these new emotions like anxiety, embarrassment, envy, and ennui.
It's what you call the boredom.
Okay, that one was weird. It's gonna be the feel everything movie of the summer. Disney and Pixar's Inside Out 2, rated PG, parental guidance suggested. Only in theaters June 14th. Get tickets now.
America's future can be determined by our dreams and our visions.
It was very intense, bright light.
For over 200 years, there have been reports of giant man-like creatures.
From another dimension, another world, I don't know.
The most intriguing mystery on the North American continent.
Hey, this is Bryce Johnson from the Bigfoot Collectors Club, and you're listening to Tyler and Woody on That Would Be Rad, because that is rad.
When you're looking at it from the outside, it just looks, it's, 2.5 stories with a mansard roof and a wide sort of shiplap siding. It was built in 1796 to its house's namesake, Hampton Lillibridge, who was originally from Rhode Island.
Synchronicity.
Yeah, no.
The vampire scare.
Yeah, that's the one, right? Yeah. Well, not the last episode, but in the Patreon when we talked about the last American vampire, yeah. Right. The design kind of matches that New England origin, even though, obviously it was built here in Georgia. Mm-hmm. So the widow of Hampton Lillibridge sold the house after he died, and its new owner converted it to a boarding house. And as a boarding house, this is when the very first tragedy happened. So a troubled sailor had come ashore for a, short break or whatever. And again, remember, Savannah, it's a port town, very busy with, either military sailors or, sailors that worked for any number of different sort of shipping companies.
Mm-hmm. Probably a lot of transients, too, just kind of
coming in. I mean, it's kind of one of those things, back in the day, when we talk about anything historic, it's like folks looking for a job, what a great way to, heck, I think that was the Navy slogan, God, maybe even still, it's like, the best way to see the world or whatever. It's like,
oh, right.
You get to travel, you get to be on a boat, you get to go to different cities. See a couple of ladies, whatever it is. So this guy came ashore, and I guess he was pretty troubled because he actually committed suicide by hanging himself in one of the guest rooms. Obviously, the suicide then kind of marred the reputation of this boarding house and kind of marked the property as a place of... nobody really wanted to stay there essentially after that for whatever reason. So eventually the boarding house actually had to close for many years and it remained vacant and no one lived there. Now we're going to fast forward many, many years later. In 1963, a guy named Jim Williams, who's actually the inspiration for the main character in the book Midnight in the Garden of Good and Evil, bought this house. At the time, Williams was an esteemed antique dealer and an architectural restorationist. So he bought this property in order to kind of restore it to its former splendor,
Right.
But here's where it kind of gets dicey, folks. And, you've heard Tyler, we've talked about this on the show where it's like, there's a weird stone you found in the middle of the woods with strange writings. You don't dig it up and take it home with you because... Charunga! Exactly. We've talked about, the Dybbuk box. You don't go to a thing. And So beware whenever you're taking things with you. This guy...
Oh, no.
Instead of restoring the home where it was, and potentially maybe it didn't have the strongest foundation. A lot of those old homes had like the stacked stone foundation, and maybe he wanted to really solidify it and everything. Bottom line is, this guy moves the entire house, the whole thing, and moves it just a few blocks down the road. Well, while he was moving it, a portion of the roof collapsed, which crushed one of Williams's anonymous laborers who died from those injuries.
And is this still the 1800s?
No. This is 1963.
Oh, so okay.
For For many, many years, it was just basically a dilapidated sort of building after that initial suicide, and the boarding house business that was in there kind of closed down. So fast forward again, it's 1963. This guy wants to restore this home, decides to move it from its current location to a different one for whatever reason. And in that move, a part of the roof collapse kills one of the workers.
Yeah.
As, of course, we would not be talking about this if that's where it all ended. After the property was, quote-unquote, successfully transplanted to its new location, a lot of weird stuff began to happen.
Oh, boy.
The construction crew who were working on the house began to notice very odd things. They would feel chills and tingling sensations on the backs of their necks. At times, they would be downstairs and they would hear the sound of furniture being dragged around in the rooms above them. They could hear laughter, voices, footsteps seemingly coming from nowhere, and sometimes even like running across the halls. Tools and construction equipment would also do weird things. They would be inexplicably moved, or they would disappear completely. Mm-hmm. In one instance, like there's, a hammer that a guy was using, blah, blah, blah. He comes back, not even comes back, looks away for a second, looks back, and the hammer's just like punched through the wall.
Jeez.
So a lot of this stuff started happening, and so the crew, I think there was one instance where a lot of the, brick masons had just they've just had it. They're working. It's down south. It's hot, probably. Doesn't matter if it's winter or not, especially in Savannah, because it's in the southern part of the state, too, for those of you that aren't from Georgia or from the U.S. And
it can get kind of cold down there, but...
Yeah, it gets chilly, but, not like Pennsylvania cold.
Still high humidity and stuff, though.
Yeah. So these brick masons who had been working on the house's new foundation, one day they just all ran out into the middle of the street, and they just were refusing to work. So Mr. Williams, Jim Williams, kind of comes onto the job site, and he's like, what's going on here? And the brick mason is reported to say, Mr. Williams, that house it's just full of people, and they're not working for you. You got to get it. You got to go in there and you got to check it out. In other words, it's not one of us employees. I don't know what's going on, but we're not going back in there.
Yeah.
So he goes in there, and he just begins to hear like this huge, like just a number of like loud crashes, all just different places throughout the house, right? So imagine, again, it was 2.5 stories, right? So imagine you're on the main floor, and then you hear like a big crash on one end of the house, and then boom, another crash closer to you in just different areas. Almost like impossible for someone to either do on their own,
right,
or run from one side to the other.
So it seemed like a coordinated effort,
right? Or
like with multiple people.
Yeah, it would seem that, yeah.
Right.
And he described the loud crashes as if furniture was being thrown against the wall and broken. He began to hear people running across the floor and kicking over furniture. So he got, because especially, I think if you're like completely skeptical about this kind of stuff, you're just going to be like, well, come on, let's go up there and I'll show you. There's nobody up here. So that's what he did. He goes upstairs, and they look around, and he shows these masons, look, man, there's nobody in here. I don't know what that is. Maybe it's a squirrel or a raccoon running around up here or something like that. So they agreed to go back to work. But unfortunately, that was pretty short-lived, because they came in there and they just were tormented with like whispers, laughter, and just weird voices that they kept on hearing. So they're like, "What? That's it." They got in their cars, left the house, refused to come back.
So real quick, just humor me for a second. Yeah. Are they seeing any actual like physical things happening, or is it all just like the sounds of crashing and stuff?
Well, perfect timing. So again, the one guy reported seeing like the hammer, like he had just put it down like on the ground to like grab something, some other materials, looks back up, the hammer's now like in the wall. Doesn't remember doing that,
Right. Like if when the owner said he was hearing like crashes and it sounded like they were throwing furniture in the wall, like when he went to go look, does it say that was actually happening? Or
no. That's just what it sounded like. So it was vacant. So there wasn't any furniture up there. But listen to this, dude.
Cool.
News of this and news of these paranormal events spread pretty quickly locally, and some local news crews came that had heard about these hauntings, and they decided, of course, to go investigate. Like, we got to go check this out. Well, they did so late in the evening, and that night, man, this news crew came to the house, and then they came to the house, they go inside, and a piece of construction material just comes flying at them. And they just whoop, 180 and get the heck out of there.
Not today, Satan. Man. You know, and I mean, not to get into like what we think or whatever, but that's a common thing with like hauntings. I mean, if you believe in these people's accounts, there's a lot of, they'll be staying at like an old hotel or an old, whatever. And like, they'll hear what sounds to be like from like another room or like, below them, like in a story below them. It's like they'll hear like this sort of huge, like sort of clamor, and it sounds like there's like a banquet going on. And then they go downstairs and there's like nothing. And I've always sort of thought of that as like a sort of a stone tape type thing.
Yeah.
So you're just hearing sort of like a replaying of like a specific time, or maybe like what, dimensionally left like an imprint of like this particular like event. So you're hearing this like party. But the thing that's really interesting about this is it either, one, goes against the stone tape theory and sort of rules it out, or number two, shows that like an actual location, even when it's moved down the road, can still hold on to that. It's not like the actual physical location, but it's actually like the building or the vessel for the event,
Yeah. Well, hey,
that's really interesting.
Because we're continually getting new listeners, for the new listeners, or perhaps for listeners that have missed an episode where we kind of explain what the stone tape theory is, give us a little miniature rundown of what you mean by stone tape theory.
It's almost like the idea that, and this is just off the top of my head, I'm not like looking or whatever, so I urge you to go look if you're unfamiliar with this, but it's basically the idea that maybe in the event of, a lot of times you think of these hauntings, I mean, it's sad, and pretty tragic, but you hear of like suicides, or you hear of, these like, murders, or like basically these events that are happening that are so highly charged emotionally, and you can look at it a lot of different ways, but whether it's we're all just vibrating molecules and energy, whether we're leaving that imprint onto like a specific place, it's almost like taking a photo or like a recording. The actual location is sort of capturing the event, and so that's why I believe that when you hear these stories and they're like, oh, if you go back on like a full moon, or you got to go at midnight on this date or whatever, and you'll see this haunted kind of thing. I think a lot of that is because it's like left this imprint and it's almost just replaying the event. So I think when the stone tape theory is concerned, I don't believe that you're actually witnessing like ghosts and like these other entities. I think it's just a replaying in the atmosphere of like a particular sort of event. Like there's been times where I remember seeing like a Ghost Hunters episode forever ago, and I think still it's probably known as like one of their like sort of biggest sort of claim to fame is like evidence, but they were at Gettysburg and they were using like a the FLIR like heat camera, it's like night vision, but then it's also showing like your like a heat signature,
yeah.
And they're showing these two guys and they're standing around what looks like a barrel with fire coming out of it, like they're keeping warm, but then it would show them and they would like pull the camera down and there's nothing there. The interesting thing is there's not even like a barrel there. So it's like replaying this little scene, and it's, I mean, I guess whenever it happens, it's like bringing in the, like items within that little area, which is pretty interesting. So, but with this, that's interesting because like Woody said, this house was moved down the road. So if this is a stone tape type situation, that means that the house itself, not just the location, has sort of been imprinted on. Mm-hmm. I said that weird, but it's been like imprinted on from like, whether it's like energy or whatever, who knows? But that's a very long-winded short answer of the stone tape.
No, that's good, dude. Okay, so despite all of these things happening, there were still a few of the workers of the restoration team that decided, you know, we're going to stay on. And perhaps, and I don't have those details, but perhaps Jim Williams, you know, offered to pay them a little bit more to complete the project. Because in this book that I read, he does talk about how he's like way behind schedule, and it was just really becoming a nuisance, all of this. So one worker, one afternoon, was working there, and he heard like a loud, sudden noise, almost as if like somebody had dropped something or something had fallen to the floor. And so, you know, he didn't really think anything of it. And so he wanted to go upstairs and make sure that nothing broke or someone was okay. Well, when he didn't return after a while, his workmates started to get a little concerned.
Oh, boy.
And so a couple of them went upstairs to see what in the world was taking him so long. They found him pretty quickly by following his terrified whimpers. When they got to him, man, he was lying face down on the wooden floor, scraping at the bare wood floor with his fingernails. Completely terrified.
Wow.
When they asked him what happened, the laborer explained that he had walked into the room looking for the source of the noise and instantly felt as though he'd been thrown into ice-cold water. And he said that he felt like he was losing control over his entire body, almost as if he was possessed.
Wow.
In his sort of panicked state, man, he reflexively dropped to the floor. And basically he said that he was desperately trying to stop this mysterious force from dragging him towards a chimney shaft that was open with a 3-story drop below. So in other words, if this force would have succeeded, this guy would have fallen, plunged down 3 stories and most likely, you know, hate to be a pessimist here in this scenario, but he probably would have died.
Now that kind of goes against the stone tape theory.
Right.
I would say.
This one's crazy, man. Here's another thing. So while he was telling his coworkers this, he kind of casually suggested, man, I wish they would do like an exorcism or something, which is interesting because I just don't know how common that sort of was or a thought process. But when he uttered the word exorcism, oh my gosh, listen to this, dude. When I read this is the reason why I was like, we got to do this. When he said the word exorcism out loud, a loud female scream echoed through the room, and all of them heard it.
And nobody else is inside. Nobody's
no
down
one
the way.
Nope.
Wow. Real quick, where he moved this house, was it like way out?
No, just a few
out
blocks
away from things.
Nope.
It was still like in the city, because you said, I guess, Oglethorpe Square or whatever.
Yeah.
Okay.
Just a few blocks away from what was originally built.
Okay.
Not only were these folks like hearing things, objects were being moved. This guy who reported feeling as if he was being pulled toward the chimney shaft, but some of them also began to spot apparitions. One of the specters that was often seen was a tall man dressed in black. They would see him at different times doing different things. So first, the crew reported seeing this apparition watching them from the 3rd floor window. They said he wore a black suit, a light-colored tie, and stood by the window, transfixed by their actions, watching every move that they made, you know, even as they were...
so bizarre.
It really is, man. It's almost as if, like, he's kind of just like, what are they doing to this house? Because this sort of started right around the time, apparently, that they were, I guess, going to be moving it. Yeah, and renovating and stuff.
Well, let me just say also for our new listeners that are maybe not familiar with this, that's another sort of pretty common like trope with ghost hunting and all that stuff is like, you know, a lot of times people will say, oh, well, we never had any sort of issues whatsoever for years. And then we decided we were going to build on like a new room or renovate a part of the house, and then suddenly now they have all this activity, and so they think that like a lot of times that, especially probably in these like older homes, this renovation like stirs up, whether it's I don't know what kind of activity for sure, but like it seems to like sort of stir it up and like cause things, So like I'm sure that to me this sounds like exactly what you said. This guy or the ghost or whatever was kind of like, hey, what's going on? Like, why are they messing with my house?
Yeah, for sure, man. It's freaky.
I mean, I thought at first you were talking about like more of like a shadow person type thing, but I think the scarier thing is the fact that they could see that he was wearing like regular clothes. Mm-hmm. So there's just this random dude just staring.
Yeah, black suit, light colored tie. And hey, folks, listen, even if that isn't a ghost, that's
scary.
Equally scary. We're going to come back
right.
all the way back to if you're a new listener, if you're an old listener, let it be known that one of the things that Tyler and I have talked about millions of times as being a terrifying idea always revolves back to that scene in Halloween, the original one, Jamie Lee Curtis, the very first one that came out. Yep. And she's in her school. She looks out the window. Poof,
Broad daylight.
Michael Myers.
You did it again.
I know, dude. I've done it all my life. Michael Myers is standing there by like a car outside the school window, just standing there. For whatever reason, man, somebody watching me from across the street is just a scary thing. And so these guys are looking up. They're seeing this man dressed in a black suit, but that's not the only specter that they saw. Some reported seeing this middle-aged man with gray hair wearing a silver robe. Maybe it was Gary Gygax. I'm not sure.
Ooh,
that's nice. For all you D&D fans.
Good pull.
But the people next door too, man, reported, just like you had kind of talked about with the stone tape theory, they talked about they would hear at different times of night noises like a party was happening, singing, dancing.
Yeah, there it is.
Here's the thing. The house was empty the whole time. Some neighbors even said that they saw people dancing from the third floor window.
Yeah, I think that there may be both going on in this house. Like, I think that it may be a combination of the stone tape theory and then something else.
And, man, yeah, for sure, man. I mean,
unless the house is just completely filled to the brim with like ghosts that are just dancing the night away.
Well, let's save our theories for the end, and I'll tell you what else it reminds me of. All right.
Okay.
The house had no reported electrical issues, but listen, when you're restoring an old house, it's not out of the box to think like, well, sometimes the lights are going to be kind of weird. But people did frequently report that the lights would flicker on and off, seemingly at random. And other people said they just would feel this like presence that they couldn't explain as they walked by or if they went inside the house. Obviously, this guy, Jim Williams, he wasn't a big believer in like the supernatural and completely kind of rejected the idea that the house itself was possessed in any way.
To me, that takes a lot of like a very strong will. Like if you're truly witnessing all this stuff and then to still be like,
and I think as far as his witness, the things that he witnessed were more like, I can kind of see how he's probably like, these guys, they're just getting spooked, and it's just,
yeah.
Because I mean, gosh, dude, I don't know if you guys have ever had a squirrel in your attic.
Or, I have. In a loft.
A cellar dweller. Just kidding. If you've had like a squirrel, it sounds like, running on the attic, sort of like support beams, sounds like there has to be a man up there. You know what I mean?
Right.
So,
and especially if they're messing with like duct work and stuff.
Yeah.
It like amplifies that sound even more.
For sure, man. And so like, I'm sure that's what he was just kind of like, I'm sure it's just that. Well, guys, it keeps on getting crazier. So during the restoration of the house at its new location, the crew actually had to dig up. Now, here you go, Poltergeist fans. They had to dig up the house's foundation in order to seat the upper stories in the new home. In the excavation, they unearthed an ancient crypt below the level of the basement foundations.
Wow.
Most likely dating even like pre-colonial time. So, to many, this indicated that, of course, this may have been a Native American, exactly, of Native American origin.
Yeah.
They said that the walls of the crypt were built with rough lime and crushed oyster shells. At the time, apparently, the workers didn't notify Jim Williams of these findings.
Oh,
and in the book, it says that it's not really clear what's happened to the crypt or, if they moved it or anything like that.
Mm-hmm.
It seems that, like, after its discovery, though, it was just simply kind of buried and underneath the house.
Mm.
And I think this is where it kind of separates Jim Williams and myself for sure, and probably Tyler and listener. I'd be interested to hear where you would be on this scale of 1 to what this guy does. So even after all of these things, people hearing parties next door, lights flickering, tools moving, things being flung at news reporters, voices, laughter, this guy feeling like he was getting drug into a chimney sweep or whatever. Guess what? Jim Williams decides after the renovation's complete, he's going to move in. And he does.
Now, was he like fairly wealthy?
Yeah.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
I say that because you can I'm just imagining this guy he's just kind of over it, because you said earlier that the workers were taking like a long time. So to him, it probably just sounds like, oh, it's just another excuse. Let's just finish it up so I can move in.
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah.
I don't know. Well, I'll tell you this. Historical homes now, I think we've talked about this too before on the show. You have to go through a bunch of red tape to renovate them in a good way. You have to use certain materials if they're on the historic registry.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know what it was like in 1963, but apparently he did have to use certain types of brick. And so there was a lot of stuff that was slowing him down anyway. Like you said, I imagine he was fed up,
Yeah, right. It sounds like it.
So he moves into this restored house around May of 1964. On the day he moved in, all the workmen and stuff kind of took bets that he would not be able to stay throughout the night.
Jeez.
Apparently, though, he spent the night alone on the 3rd floor and reported an easy night's sleep. But the quiet of the house just, didn't last long, because the very next night, he heard a terrible moan, followed by the sound of 4 people in heavy shoes shuffling up the stairs.
Oh my God! Just imagine that.
Oh my dude. Well, I'll tell you, he did what both of us would have done.
Okay.
This is a quote from Jim Williams himself. He says, "I got out my German Luger
There you
that
go.
I keep beside my bed."
Exactly.
You can imagine how frightening this was. I waited for them to stop at my door, then came into the room, but they went right up to the top floor. There it sounded as if they were having a square dance, screaming and hollering, behaving like a bunch of drunks. He reports hearing these kind of sounds every so often. And that's not even the worst of it, man. The worst of them occurred once it was like summertime. He hadn't had time to kind of install the window air conditioning unit, and so he had like the window open, and he woke up to discover that the room was full of little tiny swamp mosquitoes that were stinging him. So he remembered, because you leave the window open, hot southern night, you guys, you're going to get eaten alive, man.
Yeah, oh yeah,
Mosquitoes,
especially down there.
Especially in South Georgia. Oh my
Yeah,
gosh,
dude.
man.
Yeah.
So he remembered that he had a can of mosquito spray downstairs in his kitchen. So he got his Luger out of the drawer. I mean, here's the thing. Let me just, hold on a second now. You're getting eaten up by mosquitoes, and you're choosing to live in a house that you don't feel comfortable enough to go down to the kitchen without taking your gun with you?
Yeah, but I mean, he's still new there, and like...
Or, I mean, are you taking your gun whenever you go to the kitchen every night?
No.
Like, if you woke up in the middle of the night right now, no sounds, no nothing, just needed I don't know, man.
No, I don't even cut the lights
on.
on.
Alfalfa juice or whatever you're drinking.
I literally just keep all the lights off, and I don't get into it. Now, I will say, when I'm home alone sometimes, it feels a little like creepier. Like you don't quite feel as tough. But no, I've never taken my gun downstairs.
You don't quite feel as tough.
I mean, you know what I mean.
Oh, man. Yeah,
it's like it chips away little by little, like weird sounds and,
Yeah. I mean, if like little sounds don't bug me whenever I'm at the house by myself, but I know what you mean. Like silence is louder whenever you're by yourself, if that makes sense. Mm-hmm. And like if I did hear like a really loud bump, or like something crashed like in my basement or upstairs, on our second floor, yeah, dude, I'd be like, huh? I don't think I'd be like, well, let me go check that out.
Yeah, exactly. I don't know that I've mentioned this on the show, but there was one, this was fairly recently, where my daughters have this stupid little like husky like robot dog thing that like you press a button and it'll like raise its head and like howl, and it was in their playroom, and for some reason, I guess before they left. So for me, I always cut those stupid things off because like they're just sort of notorious. You walk in the room late to like, maybe the girls left the light on, and the second you do, the sensor goes off and it makes a noise. Well, wherever this thing was, and this just happened like the other day too, where it started doing this. I don't know if it's like because maybe it's like facing something or it's sort of setting.
And you're
off.
talking about like the type of thing that's like either that fish that's on the thing that moves when you move by, or the old 80s like Coke can that danced.
Yeah, right. Okay. Well, this one's weird though because like if it's on and I go in and like cut out the lights, even if it's facing like the other direction, it'll set the sensor off. But I kept hearing this like noise, and I was like, is somebody like singing? Like what is happening? And this time I did. I went in my closet, I got the gun, and I'm ready to go. And I walked downstairs, and the timing was like, I kind of wish I would have had like this on video, but I'm like creeping through, like, all the lights are still off, because for me, it's like, well, if the lights are off, then they can't see me either, and I obviously I'm going to know my house more than an intruder, so
yeah. Unless they've been watching you outside the window.
Yeah, that's true. No, and I walk by the door of the playroom. I have like the gun like ready to fire. And when I do, the second that I like come into view, again, I don't know how this sensor's set up, but the second that I do, it's like, oh, like this like,
oh my gosh,
little like wolf howl. But it was I guess it was sort of buried under some other stuffed animals.
You're just like,
yeah. No, I did not shoot, but it did scare the hell out of me.
Yeah.
And so I immediately turned that stupid thing off.
Well, just be careful, man. That's freaky.
Yeah, pretty scary. And nobody was home, so me pointing my gun is not a common occurrence. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's funny we talk about, like, it makes it sound like scaredy cats, I guess, but there's a lot of weird stuff that we talk about here, and sometimes it's kind of hard to, hey, I know I'm getting you for Christmas. It's a DVD. It's a Christmas movie, one of my favorites.
Ernest.
It's called Ernest Saves Christmas.
Mm-hmm.
All right.
There it is.
Let's get back to it here.
We will return after these messages.
Hey, this is Woody.
And this is Tyler. And you're listening to That Would Be Rad.
And now, back to our show. So remember, he has the windows open because it's hot. He hasn't installed his window unit yet. And he's just getting eaten alive by mosquitoes. Remembers that he needs to go down to the kitchen to get some mosquito spray.
Miserable.
Get some skeeter spray.
It makes me think of, we're big Naked and Afraid fans. And
never seen it.
You seriously?
yes, man. Mainly because just the premise
awesome.
of that makes me angry.
No, it's real. It seemed gimmicky at first, but I'm telling you, man, it's pretty addictive. But that's the thing.
We're in a survival scenario. Whoop. What happened to your clothes? Hey, man, I don't know.
Yeah, but imagine how much harder suddenly
That's why you got clothes.
Yeah, I know that sort of boosts the challenge. No, but they stay in places like, swamps and Peru and the Amazon and stuff. And like, dude, there's the amount of mosquitoes. Like, it'll be like first morning they'll wake up and like their bodies are just covered.
Oh, bro, when we lived in Indonesia, we had like just imagine this, okay? I don't know that we've ever talked about this. Every single night, every year that I lived there, I had a dang mosquito net over me.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, that's how many mosquitoes. Doesn't matter what you do. Doesn't matter the kind of house you live in. Yeah. They're just so many. You're in the tropics, man. There's different it's a different level. The mosquitoes are like the size of your fist.
Ooh,
I'm just kidding.
That.
But
now I do know you have told me before that like your butlers, they would fan the palm fronds.
So there he was. He's going down to the kitchen. Okay. He gets there. And as he was opposite this drawing room door, he sees the door, open 5 inches. He kind of pauses and then decides to kind of just go on past it. He gets to the kitchen, gets the spray, turns around, and goes back. Time.
Wait a minute. I kind of need clarification. So you're saying he's on his way to the kitchen and
he goes to the kitchen. As he's walking by, he notices a door that should not be open 5 inches.
Like an outside door?
No, inside.
Oh, okay. Just like to another room.
Just to another room. Yeah.
Okay.
Just to another room. He saw that it was open about 5 inches. So I don't think he saw it physically open, but he sees that it's open 5 inches.
Okay.
Which, it's in the middle of the night. Sometimes you're like, I don't remember doing that, but
right.
Okay. So he goes past it, successfully retrieves the mosquito spray, then turns around, goes right back the way he came, looks at the door. This time, it's closed.
Oh, boy.
So he said that basically that startled him. Obviously, he goes back to his room, sprays for mosquitoes. When he's done, he goes back and lays in bed, but just didn't sleep for the rest of the night. Then on another night, he wakes up about, you guessed it, 3:30 in the morning.
There it is.
To the sound of footsteps right beside his bed. Thinking that it was a burglar, he just kind of says loudly, "What do you want?" But there's no answer, only the sound of running feet.
Like outside his room?
Right next to his bed, pal. So he says loudly, "What do you want?" into the darkness. There is no verbal answer. All he hears is the sound of running feet coming
just
running
in
right
place.
Next to him. Running away. Just marching in place. No, running away from him. And you're kind of like a kid, man. If you just listen to the whole story, you'll have less questions. Okay. He kind of hurries into the library, the direction that it was going, and he flicks on the light so that he could still hear the footsteps, but there's no one to be seen. This time the steps were slower, as if just walking around the room.
Don't like that.
On another occasion, the door between his bedroom and the adjoining room next to it, he said that he saw a black figure enter the room, and then as he looked at him in disbelief, the figure vanished.
That sounds like my shadow person encounter. Yeah, where basically the door slowly, the knob turned slowly, and the door slowly opened, and then this thing just sort of walks out. It's terrifying. So scary. But there is something interesting with if these things are able to disappear and you see somebody walking into a room, you show up in the room and they're gone. It seems like they can kind of manipulate, reality, I guess. That they're
Time,
not confined.
Space, maybe.
Yeah, they're not confined to our physics. So what is it with why with mine in particular, and this one it sounds like, why did they have to turn the door handle and then open the door? It's like, it's weird how there's like a mix of that kind of stuff sometimes, you know?
Yeah. Well, in this one specifically, it didn't sound like the entity like opened the door. It was just kind of like standing in that sort of doorway, which I remember as a kid kind of like having some of those almost like illusionary sort of moments where I'm like, you know, staying at my grandparents' house, a house that I'm not that familiar with or whatever.
Right.
And it's part of the reason why as a kid, like I would just, nope, I'm closing the door if I'm going to sleep. I don't want any shadows.
I'm the exact same way. Same. Yeah. No, I just meant like the door, when he was on his way to the kitchen, the door was open and then, and then it was shut. It's like something's able to physically move things, you know?
Yeah. I mean, that's the hardest thing about this one so far is you can't really put a single label on it yet.
It's all over the place.
So at this point, this, you know, he's kind of had his fill. And he is just kind of, and by he, I mean Jim Williams, he's just kind of getting annoyed. And so he went to an Episcopal bishop from a nearby church named Reverend Albert Rhett Stewart. And the bishop conducted a lengthy exorcism of the restored Hampton Lillibridge house, did everything from like a ceremonial blessing and, of course, demanding that the evil spirits leave and rest in peace. And initially, the exorcism seemed to succeed for about a week. And then a few days later after that, the disturbances resumed.
Yeah, that's kind of a common thing, too. I have no explanation why, but you hear that quite a bit, actually.
And then that's when he turned to getting a man named Dr. William G. Roll of the American Psychical Research Foundation involved. And Dr. Roll stayed in the house for 4 nights while trying to find evidence of caverns, underground streams, anti-magnetic waves, or other circumstances that could cause any of these, but, you know, this phenomena. And Dr. Roll eventually concluded that the incidents were caused by, quote, emotional waves or vibrations given off by a human being after severe trauma or death. It was this research that led Dr. Roll to dub the home, quote, the most psychically possessed house in the nation.
Speaking of the Psychical Research Society, you know that one of the founders was Alexander Graham Bell.
I did not know that.
Pretty cool.
That is really cool.
Yeah, it was actually
like interesting to me, man, whenever there's like a scientific mind that famous.
Yeah,
it's also involved in this kind of stuff.
Well, that's what's pretty amazing about them.
The Smithsonian
is they were all like extremely intelligent, like, you know, scholars and psychologists, and like they were all pretty legit. You know, now it's looked at as like, you know, crackpot ghost hunters, but I mean back then it was taken like very, very seriously. And also there was a little bit of residue from like the spiritualist movement, I'm sure, which sort of led into that, you know.
Well, and then culturally in Savannah, you do have kind of a melting pot of old, you know, just like New Orleans in a way, old African-American culture and even like Spanish culture and a bunch of stuff going on in Savannah to where they're bringing their folklore into the mix as well.
Right.
And, you know, gosh, who knows? It's just like a blend of all kinds of things that could be happening. So Jim Williams eventually moves out, sells the home several years later. Since then, the house, which is on Julian Street, by the way, has changed hands a couple times. The owners of it in the 90s said that if there were spirits or anything like that, they have been friendly. And for the most part, have been quiet, but they did report a couple of weird, puzzling events that happened. Like they said that there'd been several times when they had the feeling like they weren't alone. A couple times while they lived there, they heard a sound like furniture being moved across the floor overhead, even though that part of the house was empty. Right after they moved in, the woman found herself unable to close a door in a small storage area that Mr. Williams had installed in the house. And she said that the door was, quote, locked tighter than a drum with a combination lock. the interior of the house is going to be painted. And so she called the previous owner and said, hey, I need help because, I can't get this open. And the previous owner was like, all right, I can kind of come back. It'll be a couple days. Well, the next morning when the painters got there, the storage door in the area was wide open. So the house itself, to kind of bring this piece of it to a close, was last listed for sale in 2018. Obviously, the listing didn't mention any ghost or story to past or anything. Get this, the asking price at the time, this is again 2018, was $2.1 million.
Wow.
For anybody interested, it is important to note that this is, and this is part of it to me that kind of gives this entire thing more credence. This house is not open to the public. It's a private residence. It doesn't offer ghost tours. You can't go tour the home. And so, even though we're saying, hey, it's, a short walk from Oglethorpe Square, and a lot of the kind of tours kind of walk by it, for the most part, the people obviously should be owed some respect and stuff. Don't go knocking on their door.
Right.
That kind of thing.
Well, real quick before you finish, do we know of like if it was like occupied from like I know you said it was sold.
When he sold it in the 60s. Yeah. So he
60s.
sold it to a family, and then I guess a family lived there for quite some time and sold it to another buyer in the 80s or 90s, and they lived there throughout the 90s.
Okay.
And
so
then
it did
again,
have like
recently
somebody. It did have somebody in there though for the majority of the time up until the 90s.
Yeah. From what I know, yeah.
Okay.
Yep. And apparently there've been a couple of different, if you want to kind of look into this story more, I think the Travel Channel did a little bit about it. And, there are a couple of these sort of haunting shows that have mentioned this home. But, again, I was just reading through this book and I thought, man, that is such an interesting thing because like we've said, and I think it's time we need to start kind of going into some theories here. This is an interesting case because there's a lot of stuff that's happening. Typically, when we think of some of this stuff, we think of there's one sort of aspect or a small group of sort of characteristics that really kind of point it towards, oh, that's easy, that's a poltergeist. Or, oh, that's easy, that is, you're on a burial ground. This kind of seems to have mixed it all together in a weird sort of creepy soup of weird, scary, rad strangeness.
Right.
What do you think's going on?
It's definitely bizarre. I mean, so like I've said before, I used to be like really, really into like ghosts and like spirits. I mean, growing up, as a kid in the 80s, like growing up, I would say that was like the sort of main sort of thing that like most people believed. If
that and quicksand.
yes, that and quicksand and the Bermuda Triangle, which is kind of disappeared really lately, or in the modern age. But but no, I was really, really big into it as a kid, and like I was obsessed. And like I've said a million times, my Aunt Linda was like really big into like ghost. It's funny because my cousin Haley just texted me the other day, and she was like, "Hey, do you remember that story that Aunt Linda and your mom used to tell us about the Panther Lady on Cooley Woods and like the ghost and stuff?" And I'd totally forgotten about that. But anyway, so that was like a big thing as a kid. And then I kind of just got burnt out a little bit, much like anime, when it became so like mainstream and like you had like a million like ghost hunters, ghost adventures. Like it was sort of like, I don't know. And especially like the overly dramatized ones that were like Zach Baggins, like, come at me, bro.
Oh God.
It's that.
It's the worst.
Yeah, just like, I was just like, all right, I'm kind of over this. And that's when I sort of started leaning into like interdimensional stuff and, not everything being like the spirit of someone who's like passed on. But I will say, looking at this through that lens of like, the ghost hunter kind of stuff, man, it really is a perfect storm because you have a suicide that sort of before the house was even moved. Then, okay, so say the house was haunted from that, and then they're going to move the house, which is going to awaken new things. Then they end up like realizing that where they finally settled the house, there's like some sort of crypt, that the house had been built or had sort of landed on top of, which I guess in turn would be like your Indian burial ground, 80s style, horror movie. Mm-hmm. But so it does sound like a million different things that would kind of, for me, lead to being like, well, this could be something. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. To me, a lot of the stuff, like I said before, a lot of the, I guess like clear audio or sort of the like sounds of all this stuff happening. To me, that feels very stone tape theory, but I feel like I feel like there maybe a lot of that is happening, and like the footsteps running around. I feel like all that could be maybe lumped into the stone tape theory, but like once you start getting into like doors opening and a freaking padlock being undone and then the door being wide open, like once it gets into like the physical side of it, I feel like there's clearly something going on, whether it's like a demonic thing. Mm-hmm. And I try not to immediately go to that, but I think in a lot of these cases, like, and I've sort of changed the way my belief system in the past, like, as we've like done the podcast in the last 10 years, maybe. I think that there's something.
As we've done the podcast and the last 10 years, we have not done this podcast for 10 years. It kind of sounded like
right.
That, yeah.
No. Yeah. Some days it feels like 10 years, but no, I feel like where maybe I used to think like, oh, well, this has to be because of like this guy that committed suicide, or this has to be. I think there's maybe evidence that would maybe lead me even more into like looking into the idea of, okay, once like a stigma is built around a house, and again, I'm filtering this through my own sort of encounters with like supernatural, and like especially like with the orb situation, which I've talked about in length, and we had a full episode on it. But this idea that once your intentions are sort of set on something, and you're extremely like into it, and like I think because of that, and I think it becomes sort of like an egregore or like a thought form type thing where maybe all the people in the town like saying like, oh, that house is haunted. And I mean, in my small town growing up, like, I mean, I could name 10 houses that every time we would drive by, like my mom would say, yeah, that supposedly that house is really haunted or whatever. Yeah. And it's just sort of common knowledge on a local level of like the area, and like, oh, well, this house we've heard is haunted or whatever. I think there's some evidence that may lead to, because of that like stigma and that like belief system, it's maybe creating like an opening for
whatever it is, right?
Darker, like demonic, maybe even. I don't know how that fits, but I think that belief like opens the door and gives this other thing like sort of leeway to start,
gives
keeping
it
up
the
back
power.
Yeah, right.
Yeah. It's interesting, man. I mean, even as we're saying this, is like, well, by talking about it now.
Exactly.
When you say that, I'm like, oh. Yeah, man. I mean, gosh, if you came here for answers, well, sorry, folks, this isn't the podcast for that. This is really just a place for us to tell interesting stories and talk about how freaking rad they are. And I would say, like, I agree
what do you
with
think
you.
about
I think, I don't know. It's so interesting to me because the second I think I might have an idea, it kind of gets, it's just weird. Like, one thing that I think is interesting is why in any of these cases, especially like, you've got someone's like, oh, I hear furniture moving on upstairs. Now, how come my presence in that room kind of keeps that from happening? You know what I mean? So in other words, if I'm hearing furniture being thrown across the room upstairs and I go up there, there's no furniture and it doesn't happen anymore. Like,
well,
why,
I think some of that could be tied into and I mean, this could get into, this.
The Matrix.
Well, kind of. You start getting into like spooky action at a distance, Einstein's theory. You start getting into like sort of newer concepts of like astrophysics and like sort of pseudoscience type ideas where it's like I think it's called the observer effect. And I think it's tied to like spooky action at a distance, where basically they were able to like recreate these things. And I think it's like the double slit experiment was one of them. Where
yes, we've talked about this kind of.
We briefly talked about it. Where basically this thing was happening where it was changing like the polarity of like protons or something. But it was only happening like a certain way when it was being like physically observed by people. Yeah. So I think there's a little bit of whatever that is. I definitely do not claim to know. I'm not.
Yeah. I mean, it's cool. Even just like with a basic understanding, or not even a basic understanding, but just a minimal understanding of any of that stuff. All of that kind of points toward, I think that we are connected to each other and the things around us a lot more than we, could possibly imagine.
Right. Me too.
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting, and I don't know, there's part of me that likes the idea of the fact that it doesn't necessarily have to be a tragic event to sort of imprint energy, and so the fact that like people were hearing, what was explained by them as like sounds of joy, like partying and like dancing and that kind of thing. And so kind of a more like optimistic approach to it is like, while the negative energy, perhaps that guy that committed suicide in the house could have opened up something, maybe the years and history of people living in the house or even on that land. I mean, I don't know if they demolished a building to put that one there. There's just all sorts of different things, and I don't know, it's freaky, it's interesting. I can tell you that if I was, what's really interesting is this goes right into something that we're going to talk about on the next Patreon episode that I found that I'm going to surprise you with. That is just very similar to this and a firsthand account, modern and terrifying, dude.
Man.
But then also kind of toward a little bit of what we're going to talk about next week. So I'm just pumped. I mean, this is just What
it's
what
the
an
perfect
October
season.
spectacular, dude. It really is.
For sure, man. Again, I keep going back to I don't know. I feel like this particular case is so anomalous because you finally kind of have, I mean, there's like no way of proving like either or with it, I mean, your skeptics are never going to be satisfied. I mean, we're never going to be satisfied in like what we think it is, but I find it so interesting. I mean, and this is the only house that I can think of that I've ever heard of where they've moved the house, but I find it incredibly interesting, the idea that not just the location, but the house itself is like, is sort of, holding this stuff, whether it is stone tape or whether it is like paranormal type thing.
Well, I mean,
go ahead.
No, this time I'm interrupting you, son.
No, you're fine. I'll do it to you all the
What
time.
I was going to say is like, what's interesting is when we think of these things being able to, it's just interesting. Like our mindset is, oh, well, the object has to be small. And now this kind of shows that, well, potentially it could be an entire building. Now imagine 100 years from now and imagine like an old abandoned apartment building.
Yeah, right.
I mean.
Well, and also what I was going to say is, maybe the house was, a classic. I don't know that I believe this, but okay, let's say before it was moved, this tragic event happened with this guy. So the house is, haunted in the traditional sense by this guy, right? This like spirit who can't quite pass on. And again, I don't know that I believe that anymore, but maybe that was the case. And then the house is moved, and then where it's moved to, like I said, and like you said, later you find that the house is built over this weird, like bizarre crypt. So maybe when it was moved, where they plopped it down, maybe they sat it down in a place that suddenly now we're in an environment where this new like stone tape sort of incident can happen. So maybe like you're saying, maybe they bulldozed over like a boarding house or like a dance hall or something like that. And so suddenly now you have the house is actually haunted by the spirit of this guy. And then it's also being set on top of this sort of thing. So at times you're seeing this replaying of like, you know, silverware clanking and like the clamor of like people like having a good time and dancing and all that stuff. So that's what I'm saying. I like to think that it's maybe a little bit of everything. You know what I mean?
Or maybe it's people in the future. One of the things that you can do instead of going to Disney World, you can pay to go back in time and minimally basically have a party in some abandoned house. And that's what people are seeing.
I love it. I think that's awesome.
You're in the time period. You're like, yeah, man, I want to go back into the 60s.
Oh, I would love to go back to the 60s. I am surprised with like the history of this place being so sort of rich with this sort of crazy phenomenon with like a ton of different eyewitnesses and you know, through the years. I am surprised with it being in Savannah that it's not on, like currently on like, you know, like a ghost tour.
Well, I think it is on a ghost tour. You just can't go inside.
You can't go inside.
It's still a private residence, yeah. So I'm sure if you go to Savannah and you go on the ghost tour, more than likely you're going to walk by this house for sure, yeah.
Yeah, well, I guess that's cool.
Pretty cool.
I mean, I feel like it's a real wasted opportunity, though, because with all the crazy
but
stuff.
Again, man, it kind of leads some credence to the whole thing. This guy wasn't trying to make a profit off of these stories. And
that's true.
You know, first being reported by the workers and stuff. I mean, that's the thing. Whenever, again, like we talk about on a lot of these topics, whether it's, you know, anything that's sort of paranormal or cryptids or anything like that, the more witnesses and random witnesses that you can kind of collect for the same event, the more real and more difficult it becomes to kind of just explain away.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree with that. No, I wasn't really talking about him originally. I was talking about, I guess, like the current owners. It seems like an easy moneymaker to like open these houses. I mean, it's kind of like the hotel that I stayed at, the Reed House in Chattanooga. You know, they have like room 311 is like haunted, and you know, when you're waiting on your car to be valeted or whatever, it's like it's on one of the windows, like a plaque that tells the whole thing. So it's like they're very like open with it to the point of like, hey, come stay in this room. It's haunted.
Is it like one of those challenges? Like you make it the whole night, the room's on us.
No, well, I don't know. I don't think so. All I saw was like, hey, this room's haunted. Let me ask
you a quick question. Would you do that?
Oh,
because I'll tell you my answer before. See, there you
go. Definitely.
You, yes. Me, not a chance.
Although, okay, I do say yes, but now that I have a family, I also think that there is like these, the idea of something like hanging on to you and you taking it with you.
No, thank you.
There is a little bit, I do have a little bit of fear with that the older I've gotten.
You know, speaking of the older I've gotten, man, sometimes I just look, whenever I go someplace, by the time it's nighttime, I just want to rest my heavy bones. I just want to go to bed, man. I just want to get a good night's rest and work hard the next day. I don't want to be woken up in the middle of the night by these guys who are trying to make me not have to pay for the room. You know what I mean? Like, right. No, thank you.
Right. Now, I will say I really, really, and we've talked about doing like a little double date kind of getaway with our girls to go stay at the Omni Grove Inn up in Asheville.
Yeah.
And it's so stunning and old, and it literally looks like a house built by, not a house. It looks like a massive like hotel built by hobbits. Like it's stunning and all that. But apparently they have this entity, and I don't know if she's sort of secluded or like only in like a particular room, but she's called like the Pink Lady. And they say, I know that I've heard accounts, so I guess I just answered my question. I know that people have like had sightings of her like walking the halls like down. If you've never seen this place, look up the Omni Grove Inn in Asheville. And it's like just the spa downstairs, like it's this grotto and like everything's built out of like old rock, basically. So I mean, it looks, obviously it was man-made, but I mean, it looks like it was like built inside of like a mountain or something, basically. But they say that you can see, you know, people talk about like seeing this pink lady or this like pink mist with like a figure standing in it. But I think maybe she has like her own, you know, kind of like what I said at the Reed House, like her own room, you know, that you can stay into. Wow. I would be into that. I think that would be cool.
Yeah.
I think it'd be cool.
Just want to, dude, I just want to, I can't just like have a relaxing night. You know, I don't need a vacation from my vacation. You know what I mean?
Yeah, that's true. Well, one more week and we'll finally be into the October Spooktacular finale. And we couldn't be more excited. It's going to be awesome. We're also going to have some new things, you know, to keep the party going for Halloween season over on the Patreon. So if that interests you, or if you just want more of the show, head on over to Patreon because we are really excited about it. And it's just more of what you love here on the main feed. And it's a way to, well, I guess it's like the best way to support us. You know, two married guys with kids, it takes a lot of work. It's a lot of time spent away from our families and stuff. So for the folks that are over there on the Rabbit Trail Patreon, we are so thankful and so appreciative of, you know, because times are tough. We're probably about to go into a recession with this ridiculous president. So it really means a lot to us. And we understand like just how much of a sacrifice that can be, you know, to some folks. You can also support us by leaving a 5-star review on whatever, you know, streaming service you're using to listen to the podcast, be it Spotify or Apple Podcast or Stitcher or whatever. You know, leaving that 5-star review like really, really helps us out. Also, just tell a single friend about the show. You know, it's sort of an immediate thing that just will build new listeners, and it's a very sort of organic look at it. You know, and I feel like it's probably the easiest thing to do, but it really helps. You know, we've had people reach out and say, hey, so-and-so mentioned this show, and now I've listened to like every past episode, and like we will never get tired of hearing those stories because that's
for sure.
That's amazing.
Let me just interject real quick because I know that sometimes before we were on this side of it, you know, like, you know, do you reach out to the podcast people that you like and listen to and stuff, and maybe they won't answer. Look, I can't tell you how awesome it makes us feel when we see that we have a message from a new listener that's like, hey, I just found you guys. Oh, yeah. Man, I'm really enjoying it, whatever. That just makes our day. I mean, it's just so cool. So don't be too shy or you know, don't hold back. If you're listening on the other side of the world, let us know where you're listening from, you know? Yeah. We love that kind of stuff.
Yeah, and also for those people all across the world, if you've got your own spooky story, if you've got your own local urban legend, if you've got your own thing that maybe only the locals would have heard about, you know, some sort of weird, you know, disappearance that happened, you know, 50 years ago or who knows, whatever. You can shoot us a DM over on Instagram or leave a comment, or if it's more of a long form thing, you can shoot it to thatwouldberadpod@gmail.com. But better than all those is you can leave your voice message directly on the site. We have a new site. It's thatwouldberadpodcast.com. And you can kind of do everything that we've talked about so far, you can do directly from the site, which is really cool. Yeah, one more week, you know, there's a little sadness with that, but I'm looking forward to our big Halloween finale. It's going to be awesome. You got anything else,
Absolutely.
Brother?
I think that's it, man.
Cool, dude. Well, we love you. We appreciate you. Stay spooky out there. And as always,
be rad.
That's the way it goes. My favorite song I just needed some sunshine. You were already dead, for you became a ghost. You always said our future would be a parade of flowers, but now all that's left is a single rose. That's the way it goes.
All right, I think that's good.
Dude, you can't make me laugh whenever you're like, it's just like dead silent. And then you're just like, okay, let's do some silence.
No, wait, you were talking just like during when I said, hey, let's do some silence.
No, I stopped talking.
Dude, I swear I heard something go.
Oh, weird, dude.
I swear to God. Now, don't. That's why I said, be quiet.
Wait, where'd you go, man?
Huh?
Something weird's happening here, man. It's the dadgum tulpa.
Oh, God.
You understand?
Here it is. Can you still hear me?
I can hear you now. Good Lord, that's scary, man. All right.
Man, first thing I'm doing is
saying a prayer. Volume. I'm about to get on my knees right now, man, and say a prayer. Okay?
You're like, I'm putting on my rosary.
Sometimes we talk about this stuff, and I'm just like, well, I'm going to get in my prayer closet.
That is pretty weird that we talk about this, and we lose your connection.
Come on, dude. Hey, seriously, man. Listen.
I'm just saying that's weird. We've never had that happen as far as like.
Dude, just wait until I drop this story, dude, that Ann read to me, man. It is, good Lord.
Oh, that's awesome.
It's amazing and just terrifying, man. I'm excited for the patrons, man. They're going to love it.
Yeah, dude, me too.
Honestly, what I was going to say about this episode is all this stuff kind of reminded me of Haunted Mansion, which kind of quickly became one of my favorite rides, dude. I love that.
Yeah, dude, it's such a classic.
People dancing.
Such a classic thing. Although I've never ridden it since we've been going, like, since I've had kids. I've never ridden it where it didn't break down.
Oh, really?
Did it break?
Actually, it didn't break down. It just paused at one spot. And
they paused it. Yeah, it's
Jane,
like a pause.
Man. I'll send
was she like scared of it?
Well, not after we took her on Guardians, dude. She was like, is this thing going to be scary? She just thought that everything was going to be a drop,
Yeah. Although I'm not a huge fan of like the drop deals, but the Tower of Terror just because it's like spooky and
nope,
like
not
it's
me.
Pretty awesome.
Like
it's weird because like the reason I say this is because I know that you've never even attempted to ride this, but you get in there and like you're looking in front of you and there's like a mirror. But what's cool is they have like that trick where I don't know if it's like a projector or something behind the mirror, but it'll be like a seat beside you. And then like in the mirror, you'll see like a spirit.
Yeah. They do that on, in, what's it
Haunted
called?
Mansion.
Haunted Mansion. Yeah.
Yeah. I
cool.
love that stuff. That's so cool.
Man.
Yeah.
But
I know what you're talking about where you're like, you're up in the air kind of.
What are you talking about?
And you're like, you're going by like mirrors.
Yeah, you kind of. You're not up in the air. You're just kind of like going sideways, and it's like, watch out for what do they say? Ghostly hitchhikers. And you're like, huh?
I
and
love
you just
that.
look in the mirror, and then that's when they snap a picture of you. And and dude, I've got this. You should see like Jane's face is like so adorable, dude. She's like latching onto my arm, and she's like big, wide-eyed, like, oh, it's so cute.
Just white knuckling.
And dude, I'm gonna send you like I haven't yet, and I'm probably just gonna post it. The picture of me from Guardians, dude, is the funniest thing I've ever seen in my life.
That's awesome. Those pictures always end up being so bad.
Oh boy,
I look
this,
like just.
I'm telling you right now, this is gonna take the cake, bro. It's gonna be the award. It's the funniest thing ever. I'm not gonna show it to you until like we're on the air talking about it. All right,
let's do some silence.